Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Six Pack Network. I am your host, Dylan Clemons. And today we are continuing our training camp check in shows where we are going around to all 32 NFL teams and interviewing a beat writer or reporter on what they've seen or heard at training camp. In this episode, we will be discussing the Dallas Cowboys, and here helping us do so is Brandon Loree, who covers the Dallas Cowboys for Blogging the Boys on SB Nation. Brandon, I appreciate you giving us your time here today. It's such a busy part of the year. How you doing today?
I'm great. Football is almost there. Like we're right around the corner from the
Yes.
regular season. I'm sure everybody out there who are like the diehard sicko fans was just loving all the preseason action
Yep.
from this weekend and earlier in the week. And it started with the Hall of Fame game. So I'm just
Mhm.
happy now that we don't have any Sundays left for the rest of the year without football. That's just a beautiful thing.
It really is. I couldn't be any more excited myself. I'm one of those sickos, definitely, who's been locked into the preseason. Before we jump in the interview, I want to remind everyone, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell for notifications so you know when we have a new video drop. And then head on over to fantasy6pack.net/plans to become an all-access member where you get access to our award-winning rankings, draft cheat sheets, and F6P Discord where you can ask all your custom league advice to anybody on staff. And truly is the best part. And right now, you could even save a little cash with promo code F6PNFL24 for 15% off. But without further ado, let's just jump right into things, Brandon. And let's start with the quarterback position. Mr. Dak Prescott was dealing with somewhat of a foot injury earlier in the offseason. How has he looked at camp? And is the foot injury something we still need to worry about, or is that something in the past?
I still have nightmares waking up and just kind of hanging out for the afternoon that day when that picture kind of leaked online. And,
Mhm.
I think when he was on vacation and all of a sudden there's a picture of Dak and it's from behind, so you can't really see if it's him or not, but it kind of looked like him. Everybody's heart, dropped in Cowboys
Yep.
Nation and across all the beat media reporters. And everybody's really trying hard to figure out what the heck is going on. And it turned out that it was a reported foot sprain. And he was saying it was ankle soreness because he was going on a fishing trip and he wanted to wear a boot so it didn't bother the
Mhm.
ankle from the injury that he had years ago back in 2020. So
Sure.
there's a lot of different things going on, but I could say that he's looked great. I know he did miss one day of practice last week due to some quote unquote ankle soreness, but that was just like a vet precautionary, kind of day just for him to rest a little bit. But things have been great for him entering this contract year for him, whether it's signing back with the Cowboys or potentially entering free agency and signing with another team. I think that always elevates a player's motivation to be better
Sure.
than what they were last year. And quite frankly, he couldn't have been better than what he was in his career with last year being second in MVP voting, of course, leading the NFL in touchdowns. And so I think for him, he's been really great. It started off a little slow in camp. I think that there were some, interceptions that were being thrown, but I think that's more of a product of Mike Zimmer and his defense and kind of what he's bringing. And I think the one thing
Mhm.
people aren't really thinking about, and this has been brought up on multiple platforms, is that Mike Zimmer is a really good disguise scheme defensive coordinator. And for
Okay.
Dak, that's been one of his sort of kryptonite areas that he hasn't really been able to overcome is just disguised coverages. So facing that each and every day in practice, in training camp, I think he's gotten much better because of it. A
Good.
lot of the offensive players have talked about that they've gotten better because of it. And now you're not really seeing or hearing anything about interceptions in camp anymore. So I think he's elevated that. And then, of course, without CeeDee Lamb being in camp, he's had to work with a lot more of secondary and third role players. And so that will also help him that when things aren't really working out against some of these tougher defenses with CeeDee Lamb being taken away from the offense, it'll elevate him and to go to these other guys too.
Absolutely. Love to hear that he's seeing more of that disguise coverages. So the more he's going to see it, the better he's going to get at it. So
For
that's
sure.
that's good stuff. Switching gears here, looking at the running back position. Zeke is back with Dallas after spending a year away in New England. They also have Rico Dowdle, who we've seen flash at times. Do you see this being a 50-50 split? Do you think Zeke is the lead guy? And a kind of a two-part question. If we see a veteran running back release, like just a name to throw out, Samaje Perine or something, do you see Dallas as maybe a suitor for one of those running backs as well?
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with Zeke being the relationship you just can't quit. for Jerry Jones, he's the prodigal son. I think when the Cowboys took him in the first round all those years ago, it's like there's always going to be a special place for Zeke in the heart of Jerry Jones and the ownership, and of course the coaching staff. And why wouldn't he be? I mean, he was great all throughout his career, especially as a fantasy player too. He was phenomenal from that stretch from 2016 up until kind of 2020. But I would say that right now, like he is the starter, but I think it more so than ever before, it will be 50-50. If not, I think maybe even 60-40 in the direction of Rico Dowdle. And I say that only because Zeke has clearly lost a step. He is not the same player that what he was back in even 2019, 2020, 2021. He understands that. I think he signed with the Cowboys, understanding the role with what he was brought in to be, which is, your blitz pickup, third down guy, maybe your goal line guy, and not really sort of in between the 20s. I think Rico's going to get the majority of those carries. He's certainly a lot more explosive. He's looked a lot more explosive. The one thing for Rico Dowdle is just health has been his biggest bugaboo. He kind of had his first full season healthy last year. I think he missed one game, and he's talked about that. He really wished he was able to make that because that was more of a personal pride thing. But this has really been the first offseason he hasn't really had to rehab, so he's looked a lot more explosive. And he also has talked about in interviews he's trying to improve his role in the passing game, because with Tony Pollard leaving, that was a big area of Tony's game, being a runner and a pass catcher out of the backfield. So the fact he's kind of opened that belt in his tool belt, or like compartment in the tool belt, I think really will elevate his role. And then I think with Zeke, you're looking at drafting him more as your goal line carry guy. And if he gets maybe 10 carries, 12 carries in a game for 35 yards into 2 touchdowns, I think that's sort of the stat line that will be more consistent throughout the season. But listen, it wouldn't shock me if he breaks off a 100-yard game every now and then. But I think that Dowdle will be kind of the lead guy moving forward.
Absolutely fair.
And just to answer your one question about any outside guys too, I know it was reported from Jeremy Fallow that, they're going to go with the Zeke, the Dowdle, and then potentially Royce Freeman as that third back option. But he said they are certainly not done. They're kind of looking and seeing where the chips fall outside of that. You had someone like Dalvin Cook mentioned again as a name that there was some mutual interest in before Zeke signed. And also Miles Sanders was a name that was brought up too for Carolina, where a guy who was signed a big contract, old regime, could kind of be released. And then if it's in free agency where it's on an open market, maybe he wants to sign a 1-year deal for a team that doesn't really have a clear cut number one guy right now.
Sure. Yeah, great point there for sure. Looking at the wide receiver room, you mentioned earlier, Ceedee Lamb has not been there, unfortunately, holding out, looking for a new contract extension. Jerry, just pay the man. You got to pay him. You got to pay him whatever he wants. It just kind of is what it is. Then you got Brandon Cooks, the crafty veteran. I think we know who Brandon Cooks is at this point in his career. But Brandon, I want to know if there's anyone else in this wide receiver room who can step up. Is it Jalen Tolbert? Is it somebody else? What are you thinking here?
I think you kind of named the two. If Ceedee Lamb, let's say, has this holdout extend into the regular season, sort of like Emmitt Smith did all those years ago, it's like, all right, who are the guys behind Lamb to step up? And I think it starts with Brandon Cooks. I think people forget that, just because he's had this track record of getting 1,000-yard seasons everywhere he's been, just being a very vastly underrated wide receiver, it was his first year in a new system. And I think some players, they take time to adjust to that. And I think for Cooks, he's had his opportunities, especially last year where he was open and Dak just didn't look in his direction. Maybe Mike McCarthy wasn't leaning on as much as he should have. And we saw at the back end of the season, he had a really good year as far as production, kind of getting back to the Brandon Cooks that we've known to see over his career. And even as early as this offseason, once the year ended, Brandon Cooks talked about how he wanted a larger role in the offense for this season coming up. And he said that, I want Mike McCarthy to know that he can rely on me. So I think that in camp with Lamb's absence, Cooks has looked like the number one wide receiver. But I also think Jalen Tolbert has really stepped up a lot too. A lot of people were expecting him to take a huge step forward last year with Michael Gallup kind of recovering from the torn ACL. It didn't really happen. He definitely had his best career year, but for a few hundred yards and a few touchdowns, that's not really saying much. But now that Michael Gallup is gone, Tolbert has really elevated. And I think you're seeing the dividends of him really connecting with Dak in the offseason. Dak has sort of been his guy. He's really relied on Dak and his leadership, his mentorship. So I think that you're going to see him elevate into that kind of solidified number 3 role. And we saw that the Cowboys all those years ago had a lot of success with Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup. So
Yep.
they've shown in their DNA that Dak is a facilitator. If he feels like he can go to Amari or CeeDee Lamb, one game, Cooks another, Tolbert the next, I think that you're going to see that too. And I think that Tolbert is in line for a breakout year. That could be maybe 500 yards. It could be 400 yards and a few touchdowns there. But I also wouldn't be shocked if it's for 700 yards if he continues to stack good days on good days.
That's great to hear. Love to hear Tolbert on a potential breakout. Looking at the tight end position now, could Jake Ferguson slide in as the second leading target getter for Dak in this offense?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think if all things are equal, CeeDee Lamb is paid and he's going into the regular season, with all systems go, I think it's going to be CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson as the top 2 guys in this offense. I think they have big plans for Jake Ferguson. I think last year was a great sign of what could be his future in the NFL, which could be a top 10 tight end. I think his rookie season, there were flashes between him and Peyton Hendershot and Dalton Schultz. And it was like, okay, great. These are some young up and coming tight ends. Let's see where they can go. Because, for Jake Ferguson, he was a 4th round pick. I don't think the Cowboys had any idea of him being a developed pass catcher the way he's turned into. I think it was more run blocking and then see what you can get from that standpoint. But he showed to be a very athletic and dynamic tight end. And I think that when you look at, I was listening to another platform that talks about, fantasy football. And they mentioned that Jake Ferguson had the number 1 targets in red zone attempts last year. And it's like, that is where Dak loves to throw. He loves throwing to tight ends. That's sort of like Dak and tight ends. That's the best kind of combination you can get as far as a football combination on the football field. So I think for Jake, the sky is the absolute limit for him. I think by the end of the year, we'll be talking about him as sort of a top 10 tight end, maybe even top 7 at the absolute ceiling. I would say for right now, top 5. And I could see him having close to maybe a 700-800 yard season, but definitely the end zone, kind of touchdown reception end. I think that's where he's going to be making his bread and butter. And I think he could even have a 10 touchdown type season.
Yeah, absolutely. Ferguson's someone who I'm targeting in fantasy drafts this season.
Especially PPR. You got to,
yes.
I mean, Dak is somebody where he will throw to them, whether they're open or not, the seam ball, whatever. And even if it's just stuff on screens, I mean, the guy's going to be used all over the place. And if the only thing that's going to limit him is his health. And right now he's 100% healthy. So I think it's going to be all systems go for him.
Absolutely. And that double-digit touchdown upside is so appealing.
Oh, yeah.
Then the last question I got for you, we've been asking everybody. We are a fantasy-focused channel, so I wanted to ask one question here that pertains mostly to fantasy. Who is the player that is going to surprise fantasy managers, good or bad, that they need to know about?
Yeah, I think we talked about Jake Ferguson. I think maybe not a lot of people are looking at him right now as sort of a top NFL guy because it's just it's not your Travis Kelce's, it's not your Sam Laporta's, it's not really a sexy name. But I do think value-wise, he could turn out to be, like we talked about in PPR leagues and stuff like that, an absolute steal, whether it's at the back end of the draft or sort of in that middle part. I would say Brandon Cooks is sort of a dark horse. Again, his second year in the offense, I think can really pay off. And then we talked about the running backs. I wouldn't draft these guys really high at all. I think this will really be the first year that a Cowboys running back since Zeke entered the league isn't going to be a starter on anybody's team. Even if you had a 2 running back system or even if you had somebody as a flex option, I mean, probably upside right now for Zeke is a flex. Same for Rico, but you just really have to see where it goes towards the second half of the year because they have a really tough schedule to start. I think they play the entire AFC North to start for the first half of the season. They're starting on the road against the Browns. I mean, these are some tough defenses that, with the Cowboys having a young, new offensive line, you got to see how those things shake out. So I wouldn't draft those guys too high. And then lastly, you got to talk about the kicker, right? Brandon Aubrey, he's my namesake. I always had a certain kinship with him when he came to the league last year. He was the number 1 kicker last year across the board for the Cowboys and across all kickers in the NFL. So I think for him, if you can add him maybe a round earlier, so just to insert him in the lineup to know that each week he'll get you maybe 10 points at the absolute least because the Cowboys shown that they are going to be a scoring offense. I think even though the expectations are at a really low point right now for Cowboys fans and across the NFL, I think that you shouldn't forget that they are a really dynamic offense, and Mike McCarthy isn't shy of throwing Aubrey out there for a 60-yarder every now and then. And then also from the defensive standpoint too, they showed on against the Rams on Sunday night that they're still able to take away the football even though Dan Quinn isn't there. They talked about that there might be a little bit of a regression from the turnover side of things, but you still have Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland there as the ball hawks in the secondary, and Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. So I think that the defense should still be drafted at a decent range, as far as defenses go.
All right. Great stuff, Brandon. Absolutely fantastic. Before we get you out of here, I want to just let everyone know where they can find you and where they can check out your work at.
Yeah, it's at Brandon is right, and that's WRITE. Always got to throw a good writing pun in there. And then also check out everything at bloggingtheboys.com with articles up on there. And everybody at the site does great work covering the Cowboys. So be sure to check everything out there too.
Awesome. Yes, make sure to give Brandon a follow. It does great stuff. But that wraps up the Dallas Cowboys training camp check-in show. We will be back later this week. But for Brandon Loree, I'm Dylan Clemons. I will talk at you next time.